Every day, your City of Tempe staff goes above and beyond to make sure our community gets the best possible services and the most for our tax dollars. But how good is good? How do you measure it? And how do we know what we really need to make progress on some of our most pressing issues? To guide us, we developed a series of goals designed to help us improve our community based on our Tempe City Council's 5 strategic priorities. Reaching for excellence, we are comparing ourselves against the rest of the nation as well as ourselves. Some of our goals will help save lives. Some of them will help us save money. All of them will help us make Tempe a better place. Tempe Accelerates is an opportunity for you to get involved. Hear what city staff and community partners are doing to reach our goals. Your role? You are a vital part of our community. Share your ideas and help us craft better solutions. Ask questions. Be part of the conversation either in person or online. Check tempe.gov/Tempe Accelerates for dates and times of our next programs and collaborate with us at Tempe City Hall. Today, we will hyper-focus on 2 performance measures. Each presenting team will have 10 minutes to share data, strategies, and progress on a performance measure. Then, you will have about 10 minutes to ask questions or offer suggestions and ideas. On the back of your agenda, we have resource questions to help you participate in the conversation. Also included with your agenda is a quick survey with space you can use to include any ideas or suggestions you might have about today's topics. Thank you for participating. Now, let's accelerate.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. As the promo says, we're going to have 2 presentations today. Our first will be on youth safety and juvenile crime. The second on such excitement in the room. This is great. And employee vertical diversity. And the team is ready to go. So let's, without further ado, hear from them. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. Keith, thanks for the warm welcome. Awesome. We're here to talk about community services and safe and secure communities. I'm Jeremy King from the Kids on Enrichment Program.
And I'm Alex Jovanovich with Parks and Recreation.
All right, let's get started. So today's performance measure is 1.32. It reads, achieve a rate of youth affected by crime lower than the national benchmarks. This could have a big under construction symbol right over the top of it right now. This is a relatively new measure, so you'll be seeing some of the beginnings of this measure and some ways that we're going to be moving it forward. But to kick it off, I really wanted to just touch on a couple of definitions that you'll be seeing today. One is youth or juveniles. While we understand that that refers to all youth and especially a lot of the programs and community services, we understand starting them young and getting them involved in things early can have a real long impact on kind of their outlook on life and them being a part of the community. But today's stats are really going to focus on youth and juveniles in the 10 to 17-year-old range. There's not a lot of kindergartners out there being arrested, so those stats don't necessarily apply. While that still affects some of the statistics, we'll be looking at usually youth in the 10 to 17 range. Also, the word affected. We started this measure, and you'll see kind of its evolution, but affected today is going to both mean a victim of a crime or one who commits a crime. So putting those together in some way, shape, or form, it is affecting their lives. So why safe and secure communities? Juvenile crime peaks in the after-school hours. There's 11.3 million kids in our nation going home unsupervised from the hours of 3 to 6. It's the peak time for those committing crimes or being a victim of a crime. And it's also a time for adverse behavior. So getting them in positive programs like those in community services and around the city are really important and leads to our safe and secure community. So if you looked at any of the dashboard or any of the handouts today, you might see an original measure and then kind of a proposed measure moving forward. So the original performance measure statistics were based solely on arrests in Tempe related to the population. It was kind of the easiest one to grab at as I was just part-time researching and kind of diving into the measure. Since then, we have been privileged to have one of the interns through the Strategic Management Department and William Chango from ASU put some work into this. So most of what we'll be presenting today is based on that research and how we'll be presenting it to council in the future. So updated performance statistics that you'll see on the screen there. The blue bar represents those total juveniles in the city of Tempe in that range that we talked about earlier. The orange bar will be those affected, so either being a victim of crime or committing a crime themselves. Now, while the chart does go up because the population is rising here, those orange bars are actually shrinking, so we put the percentages there. So in 2013, that 6.3% were affected by crime. And now currently you'll see our latest stats are from 2017, and that's 4.73 total youth affected by crime. So what do we compare that to? We had to look at some national databases and really piece things together. So the National Crime Victimization Survey is one of the resources that we looked at youth who are victims of crime. And then we took the statistics from the Office of Juvenile Justice, and they gather all of the data from the FBI, who goes to all the police departments and kind of puts together all of the data on crimes in our country, and they report that to the juvenile justice. You'll see it broken down by region here, which is kind of, odd and interesting, but that is how the data was presented to us from the National Victimization Survey. So we had to dive down, find out all of the different states that were listed there, and then apply the FBI data for arrests. But it did give us an average percentage for each of those regions, and then we averaged that out. So our total average in the national benchmark is 3.05% of youth affected by crime. So where that leaves us is a performance measure goal for Tempe, and our baseline currently in 2017 is 4.73%, and then our target is our national average of 3.05%. So why does this measure matter? So adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are those types of things where those crimes and being a victim of crime fall in. You'll see it is a wide range of things that adverse childhood experiences cover. It could be verbal abuse, neglect in different areas, substance abuse, exposure to violence, among other things. And what happens is if a child has ACEs in their life, it creates this cycle where not only are they more likely to have additional ACEs, but they're likely to be victims or commit a crime or provide ACEs for other youth in their walk. So the goal is to kind of break the cycle, not leading to more crimes, a poorer self-image, and then also things for our community like a burden on our healthcare system, loss of wages for people not attending, or damaged property for crime. So the goal is to really not continue that cycle. And how do we achieve this goal? When we did performance measure 1.18, we talked about participation in community services programs, and we came up with this formula. And it's that participation, but plus the quality programming, is what's going to equal our safe and secure community. So we know that if kids are in something positive after school, especially in those hours of 3 to 6 p.m., that's a safe environment for them to be in, and they're less likely to be a victim or commit a crime. So programs like the Kids Zone program, multi-generational centers, arts, library, and recreation programs really fit that mold where we can actually have positive role models for these students. We're also becoming more trauma-informed care, which is specifically talking about dealing with ACEs. So we work with the staff members, get them trauma-informed so that they can build some resiliency in our kids, build up that self-esteem, and propel them further. And then finally, the Surgeon General, as I mentioned in 1.18, says that for these adverse behaviors, we should actually be prescribing things like after school, because kids need to develop a passion or a love for something, and it's less likely that they will fall into crimes or becoming a victim of crime, putting themselves in those positions. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex to talk about some of the current strategies we're using.
Well, as Jeremy stated, the goal of performance measure 1.32 is to reduce the rate of youth affected by crime. While this is a community services-led performance measure, interdepartment collaborations and community partnerships are vital for making the biggest impact and accelerating our progress. We're currently utilizing 3 strategies. The first one being providing quality programming, as Jeremy touched on. The second one being providing opportunities for accessible or affordable programming. And then the third one is to utilize collaborations and partnerships to optimize our program offerings. Currently, community services provides quality programming through Kids Zone's before and after school program, multi-generational center programming, youth sports, and library and art engagement through emotional and learning objectives. Offering quality programming is only part of the equation. If youth can't participate, then there's no effect essentially. So we're always examining and seeking opportunities to potentially offer more scholarship opportunities, as well as seeking grant funding to reduce the cost, and then also potentially seeking council direction for the possibility of providing additional free programming. As I mentioned, partnerships and collaborations are vital for success of this measure. Several examples of our partnerships and collaborations is an internal partnership between Human Services, the library, and Escalante, providing literacy outreach and education through the Acceleration Zone and the Story Walk at Escalante Park. The police department collaborates with Community Services on several programs, one being the All-City Athletic Conference middle school football program, another being Teen Night Hoops at Escalante, and a third being most recently coordination of a program at North Tempe and Westside Multi-Generational Program, or centers for a soccer program coordinated with the Boys and Girls Club. We also have an important external partnership, or we have several external partnerships. One example would be a partnership Community Services has with the Tempe Elementary School District, where we provide after school and weekend soccer program for fifth graders for all 16 of the Tempe elementary schools. While these aren't current strategies, a few ways departments have been working together to help advance this measure, maybe not even knowing it, is the work that groups are doing on Performance Measure 1.31. Also, Human Services work on trauma-informed care, as well as Tempe's coalition to reduce underage drinking and drug abuse, the work they've been doing. As the data shows, we've made some progress over the last few years. Obviously, we have a lot of work to do. So some future strategies that we're exploring are the potential of creating a coalition similar to Tempe's coalition for reducing underage drinking and drug abuse, using that as a model to potentially reduce youth affected by crime in Tempe. Part of that coalition could be further examining those as opportunities, or assisting in the implementation of something called a pre-arrest diversion program. Pre-arrest diversion, generally around the country, is considered restorative. It's called restorative justice or restorative justice intervention. So basically a teen court program could be involved in that to assist with that. A pre-arrest diversion program would provide police officers the potential, depending on the crime committed, to place a youth into the program, which would allow that youth committing the crime as well as the victim, they essentially wouldn't be counted in the stats any longer. But more importantly, it would empower the youth by providing them some control over the situation, control over their own destiny. It would provide specifically the victim some say in what happens in that whole process. The pre-arrest diversion program could help end the cycle of adverse childhood experiences. In addition to that, we're looking at offering additional programming or other ways that we can influence programming. So as Jeremy stated, participation and quality programming is what helps reduce youth affected by crime. Participation, whether it's inactive or active, is a part of that equation. It's an important part of that equation, and it's a benefit to the youth, whether they're just there or even if it's not a quality program, so to speak. But we're striving to offer both. We're striving to couple that participation with the quality programming. Using KidZone as an example, they have a 1-to-12 staff to participant ratio. We'd like to potentially look at the opportunity to examine current lease agreements, current agreements that we have with community partners to potentially hold them to the same quality standard. That could go a long way to advance this performance measure. In addition to that, while some training has taken place, we think there's an opportunity to have all employees or all people that are working with youth provided training for or through trauma-informed care. That would make a big difference to potentially stop that cycle of adverse childhood experiences or dealing with those adverse childhood experiences. In addition, we need to continue engaging parents when possible. That helps build a strong foundation. An example of that would be Triple P Parenting Program through Human Services. Engages parents that could assist in changing behavior as well as helping end the cycle of ACEs. In conclusion, to accelerate this performance measure, we need collaboration from everyone in the community that cares about the youth to offer programs that are accessible. Tempe depends on its ability to foster health and well-being for the next generation, and collectively we can create a healthy, safe, and secure community for our kids in Tempe. With that, that concludes our presentation, and Jeremy is eagerly awaiting all your questions.
Nice pitch, nice pitch.
Gentlemen. All right, let's open it up to some questions for the presenters. Anyone? Don't make me start. I will.
You always ask the tough ones, so.
Mhm.
Nope. Okay. Question. The target, and we're about a little less than 2 percentage points off the target. What's the breakdown between how many of those are victims of crime and how many of them are perpetrators of crime?
It's a good question. If we look at kind of the most recent stats, I'm just going to give you a ballpark figure. About 100 arrests have taken place and about 400 victims. I think it was about 500 in that most recent one. So it is an aggregate of youth affected by crime, but there's definitely the opportunity to kind of focus our area of energy and resources into some specific ideas and strategies to really reduce that measure.
With respect to the victims of crime, the much
Correct.
higher number. And of that total number of victims, how many of them are victims of like nonviolent crimes? Let's say, for instance, like a vehicular crime. If you're a passenger in a DUI or something.
Right. So as I said, this measure is definitely still under construction, and we have dived into that first level, knowing who are victims and who have been arrested, but there's a lot of different things that we could kind of continue to dive into. It's been mentioned, what zip codes are these crimes happening, and are there areas of expertise that we can look at? So I think as this coalition is formed, as someone kind of really takes the charge and examines where we're going to be going, and we can look even further down into the stats.
I guess it'd also be interesting to know to what extent youth victims of crime tend to report or not report crimes.
I think that's going to be a huge, comparing two surveys, looking for a national and our process was a really difficult one to find one that was similar in the way that they were reported. That youth victimization survey plus our City of Tempe process are the same reporting style. So it is, it's youth reported and officer reported at this point. So the survey is a little bit more all-encompassing, but the City of Tempe process is based mostly on the officers and their conversations with youth.
I'm just curious because you can be a victim of a crime without that crime ever being reported or prosecuted or filed in any way.
Absolutely. This definitely misses a lot of those issues, yes.
Except what I guess I don't know is of those 400 we have, how many of them are victims of actual reported crimes versus they report themselves as victims in unreported crimes?
Probably a lot higher number here in the City of Tempe because I know that that number comes directly from the officers.
From the officers, okay. All right, good to know. A question down here? 1 second, let's get you on mic.
Thank you. So the strategies are in order to prevent youth affected by other youth and youth committing crime. But my question is, where does youth who is affected by non-youths go, or where are the strategies for those affected that are youth or children affected by non-other youth? And if we put them in the same category and use the same strategies, like don't people who are victims would need a different kind of additional treatment than those who incur into the crime? So I just a little bit of clarification on that. Thank you.
Okay. So when
I whispered something to him, so he thought I wanted to take the answer.
I thought you were excited, you know? So to answer your question, this would be any youth affected by either an adult or a youth. So it is not just youth on youth victims. So any youth who is involved in some type of crime and thought they were a victim, reported that to the officers, that is what that data refers to. So as far as the strategies, that kind of does expand. We're not just working on youth, it is also making sure, but that's where the adverse childhood experience is. And most people who end up committing crimes later in life had some ACEs in their life that led up to that. And that's the cycle that we're trying to break early in youth. So it's really that proactive, situational, that we can put them in positive programs and really break that cycle all the way into adulthood.
Question, anyone else?
Hence the microphones here. Thank you for the presentation. What is the number you're using as a denominator? So we have so many crimes. Is it the number of youth between 10 and 17 who live in the city, who go to Tempe schools, some combination of that? And does everybody use the same measure?
It was, I'd say the biggest challenge of this was finding the measure that was the same across the board. As far as our measure here in the city of Tempe, I think that would include any officer-related incident. But Luton, who helped us with the statistics in the police department, would probably be the best person to dive down deeper. And as we've kind of been working through this, I think we want to dive deeper as we're getting those definitions made. But I think it would include other youth involved in the city.
I guess my question is, we're at 4.73%. That is 4.373% of the kids who live here are involved in crime, or 4.73% of the kids who go to school here? What is it, 4.73% of what?
It is probably 4.73% of the students who live here.
Students.
Right.
So you get the numbers from the schools.
From the police department. So you're right. It could be someone who attends a school, who lives in Ahwatukee or lives in Maricopa and does come into town. Yes, they could be involved in the schools. Our numbers of youth are from census data. The arrests.
So the census data is what you're using as the number of total youth. I got you.
Arrest data. I couldn't tell you if all of them are Tempe residents. Oh, I apologize. Got it.
4.73% of all youth are either the victim of or perpetrate a crime in Tempe between the ages of 10 and 17.
Yes,
in any year.
And the confusion, and to your question, is if a youth reports to a Tempe officer that they were a victim of the crime and they live outside of Tempe, it would be an outlier in our statistics. Yes.
Do we have anything that we can point to today as you're beginning to look at this measure as to why our number is above the national average at this point?
Not in my research. I do not know. I do know that as I did both the research initially on arrests and the research on the youth affected by crime, that we are trending in the right direction. But I do not know currently why that is.
It'd be interesting to know if we can get down to this level of data, whether or not those youths, whether they are perpetrators of or victims of crime, have had connections with city services and programs in the past. We can track that and see over like the last 5 years whether or not they've received assistance through human services or participated in recreational programs, et cetera. Is there a way we can get down to that level in terms of actually finding names and that kind of data as well?
We didn't dive that far, but I think it's a great idea if we're actually looking at community services effect and the programs that they attend. If the police department would be willing to ask that data or figure out that data, or if we were able to dive down deeper into what they already had, we probably could pull that information.
I'm going to make an assumption on your last question, and this is just my opinion, 100% assumption, that reporting may be better in Tempe just for the simple fact that compared to, and I can't compare this to all communities because I don't know how their police department works, but we have police resource officers at a lot of the schools. So you take middle school, all the middle schools and high schools in Tempe have police resource officers. So there could be a better relationship between those students and could be more opportunity for them to report those issues. Just an assumption though.
I'll go ahead and make an assumption as well and say that, you know, generally speaking, Tempe's poverty rate is above the national average of poverty rate, and that perhaps there's some socioeconomic correlation between, you know, economic income status and whether or not you're going to perpetrate or be a victim of crime, potentially. I don't know that, but there could be something there as well. Yep. Anyone else? Good questions. If you think of some later, you can write them down and give them to the team. But let's give them a round. Very well done. Well, they are packing up their things. We're going to welcome up the next team. HR squad in the house. Employee vertical diversity. Performance measure 2.20. Looks like we have John and Lawrence. Take it away.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lawrence Lavictoire with the Human Resources Department, and with me is...
I'm John O'Connor. I'm the Deputy Internal Services Director over Human Resources.
And today we're going to be talking about the performance measure employee vertical diversity. And make sure, okay. And as you can see, this falls under council priority number 2, which is strong community commitments. City of Tempe provides services for our residents and the community as a whole. And ideally, the City of Tempe's workforce that provides those services should reflect the diversity within the community. So vertical diversity is one way that we can measure this. So in terms of why does these measures matter? This is another step in the city's continuing efforts to create an inclusive work environment. The city's diversity commitment creates an inclusive and accepting work culture, creates an environment of innovation based on a wide variety of viewpoints, experiences, and ideas. It expands the talent pool from which we hire, improves and attracts and retains employees, and greater customer satisfactions as residents see the workforce that's in the community representative of themselves and the community as a whole. And it also strengthens the city's reputation as a progressive employer. So what is the goal? Well, the goal here is to achieve by 2030 a vertical diversity within the city that's within plus or minus 5% of the Maricopa County's population. So what is our target? Well, city's information is compared to Maricopa County's labor force statistics to identify how closely we mirror the community. The comparisons help us identify where the city does reflect the community's demographics, but more importantly, it also identifies opportunities in which we as a city can improve our outreach. So the baseline data here, it's real small, so everybody take out your opera glasses so you can see it. But basically, this is what vertical diversity is in terms of it provides statistical information of the race and gender demographics of the city employee population as it's compared to Maricopa County's workforce population. And it falls into 8 EOC job categories. And these categories include administrative support, officials and administrators, professionals, protective services, both sworn and non-sworn, service maintenance, skilled craft, and technicians. So got a couple of examples. It'll be probably difficult to see, but in this example here, if you look under the job category, it falls under professionals, and under Hispanic Latino, we see that Hispanic females, the city of Tempe has 2% more professionals that are Hispanic female than Maricopa County's workforce. And then in terms of male, we're also at 2%. So we're within that plus or minus 5% that our goal is. We also have another example here. In the second example, we're looking at the technicians. And there you see with Hispanic females that the city of Tempe is less than 6% under what Maricopa County shows. And then in terms of males, we're 19% higher than what would be in Maricopa County. So with that, we would see an opportunity there where we might do more outreach to attract more Hispanic females to consider working at the city in that technician role. So the baseline data here, this is just a real quick visual representation. Those green celled areas, those show where we're on target. And then those that are sort of, as I've been told, salmon colored cells, those are the ones in which we would require us to look at a little bit more closely and see what opportunities we might have. And with this, I'll hand this over to John.
Thank you. So there are certain challenges that we face in trying to address vertical diversity in the organization. And the biggest one is if you look at our Tempe City Charter, it actually states that we are required in our personnel activities, and that would include recruiting and selecting employees and promoting employees to follow a merit system. In a nutshell, basically that means that we have to hire people based on merit. So we can't do anything outside of those parameters to change the statistics that Lawrence has talked about. We can't do any sort of affirmative action, which some of you may be familiar with. We have to focus on other ways to address some of the shortfalls that we see there. Additionally, another challenge, which is actually a good thing, but we do have a low turnover rate here in the city, and we've had a low turnover rate over the last 20 years that I've been here. So that also is a challenge because it means that we don't necessarily have a lot of opportunities to make changes within our employee population because of that low turnover rate. Again, we don't want to look at that as necessarily being negative, but it does present certain challenges to us. So what are some of the ways that we look at with regards to our strategies and addressing vertical diversity and addressing inclusion within the workplace? So let me talk a little bit about some of those. One of the things that we do here in the city of Tempe and that we continue to strengthen is the work that we do within our six-sided partnership. Basically, our six-sided partnership represents all of our employees, all of our regular benefited employees across the city. They fall into six different groups, and everything that we do here in the city with regards to our human resources processes, we work with the six-sided partnership to get their input in making any changes with regards to any of those processes. So as an example, we are just in the process of completing revisions to our recruitment and selection guidelines. So we have our City of Tempe personnel rules, which provide policy with regards to how we handle processes in the city, but we also have guidelines that we develop to assist our employees and supervisors with regards to those processes. And we are consistently looking at updating those processes and updating those guidelines, and we do that through the six-sided partnership. So that's one way that we continue to look for new ideas, to get input from the total employee population, and address the ongoing challenges that we face with regards to not only maintaining the diverse and inclusive organization that we've developed, but also growing that and developing that. Another of the strategies that we utilize is training. So we are well known here in the city for having developed quite a few years ago now our Tempe Learning Center. So through the Office of Strategic Management and Diversity, as well as through Human Resources, we provide a lot of internal training opportunities for our employees here. And how does this help with internal diversity? Well, for example, one of the things that we have been doing for years now is to provide training to employees with regards to how they can go through promotional processes, how they can interview better, and all of the things that are involved in moving forward in the organization. We're not looking just to bring employees in from the outside, but also to offer as much as we can opportunities for our current employee population to promote and move into positions, particularly in areas where we need to increase the diversity. We do a lot of other training here in the city as well and provide a lot of opportunities for professional growth. Just last year, city management increased our tuition reimbursement program, the benefit there from $5,000 to $6,000 annually. And so that provides opportunities for all of our employees to go out there and get additional education that increases their opportunities for promotions within the city. So basically, as you're all familiar with, I mean, Tempe is known across the valley, throughout the country, as being one of the leaders with regards to inclusion and diversity with regards to our community. We are a very open community. We're a very embracing community. We do a lot of work out there in order to address the diversity that we have in this community. And we want our employee organization, our workforce here, to reflect that. And that's part of the strategy and the whole overall goal that we have in moving forward our efforts to increase the vertical diversity in the organization. I wanted to touch briefly on one thing that we have done in human resources, despite some of the challenges that we do face with regards to how we affect these particular issues. We have made some significant efforts over the last 2 or 3 years with regards to getting more involved in job fairs and all sorts of different opportunities across the valley where we can get out there and connect with individuals who are looking for employment. And obviously, the more diverse the organizations that we're involved in and the more effort that we make with regards to that gives us more of an opportunity to increase the diversity of our applicant pool. And that's one of the key things, one of the key strategies that we're looking at here, because while we have certain restrictions with regards to our merit system, we can certainly make effort with regards to increasing the diversity of the applicant pools that we have for all of the different positions that we have. So one of the things that we focus on, as an example, in those areas, some of which Lawrence pointed to, where we see, for instance, there's not as much gender diversity or we're out of balance with regards to Maricopa County, we make the effort to go out there in job fairs and in our outreach with regards to recruitment to try and recruit from areas that are not typically recruited from. So if we're looking to fill positions and we feel like we've got an overabundance of males in certain jobs, then we look to reach out to organizations where we may be able to attract more females into those positions. So we've worked with Goodwill, we've worked with the Reentry Expo, we've worked with organizations that assist disabled individuals in the community who are looking for employment. We've made considerable outreach over the last 2 or 3 years with regards to that, and we're hopeful that those efforts will allow us to continue to move forward in increasing the vertical diversity in the organization. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions that you have for Lawrence.
Questions?
Thank you very much. Oh, more time?
Well, something I was hoping you could clarify when you showed the vertical diversity slide, the breakdown of the various positions by race and gender. When we see something like we're 2%, let's say, above the county, is that all employers or just public sector employers?
That's actually reflective of the entire workforce in Maricopa County. So, for example, the one that was 2% above, I want to say it's like Maricopa County was like 5% and Tempe was at 7%. So we were 2% higher than that.
So for situations like the one where we were 6 percentage points less than the rest of the workforce, are there employers that we could look to, the ones who are maybe have a better balance or closer to what we're trying to get to talk to them about what their strategies were and how they got to that place?
That could be definitely one of the areas that we could look towards, seeing how we can improve. Also, I think a lot of it is, best thing is to do community outreach, make sure that people know that we have positions available, see if there's areas that we could advertise, encourage people to apply. But as to what you're saying, we could find out if there's employers out there that have a higher number and maybe what they've been found successful for it.
I know for a lot of the things that we do as a city to create benchmarks for salary purposes, we look at other cities, right? This measurement looks at the entire Maricopa County workforce. Is it helpful to have a sub-measure that looks at our benchmark cities and what their vertical diversity looks like to get a sense of it from a public sector perspective? Or is that not helpful?
No, I think that would be very helpful. It gives us a certain additional perspective because I think, it is a challenge with how you measure up against other organizations. And obviously there are certain differences that are significant between the private and the public sector. And the numbers that we're looking at here cover all of that. So I think, we do have good relationships and we do a lot of sort of going back and forth and getting information and working with other local government agencies across the valley. We could certainly look at doing that, getting some of that information and some of those statistics as well relevant to this.
Great, thank you. Other thoughts, questions? Here we go.
You did a nice presentation, so thank you. You talked about the diversity of the applicant pool. Are you able to track how successful you are on that through your outreach program? And therefore, when you're looking at new employees that we've hired, that it's going up as a result of that outreach?
Well, that information is voluntary on the part of the person that's applying for the position. There's a section as they go through that they can voluntarily include information that would provide us with some of that demographic information. Some people choose not to complete it. So even though we would have some data to work with, it might be somewhat incomplete. But we could say in terms of that, we could compare maybe recruitments over the last, oftentimes we'll see the same position open up 2 or 3 times in a year. We could go back and look, are we seeing a trend in terms of those that are self-reporting? Are we seeing more diversity in terms of areas that we're looking to improve on? Are we getting more interest, so to speak?
One thing I would note is that despite the fact that we have such low unemployment across the country at the moment, we still see with some of our positions, very significant numbers of applications. It's not unusual for some of our, particularly our entry-level positions, for us to receive 300 to 400 applications for those positions. So that's a good sign, and we want to certainly increase that if we can. Some of the analysts are sitting over there and saying, oh, we have to go through 500 or 600 applications now. But that is one indication, but Lawrence is correct. I mean, this is another one of the challenges, is that some of that information that we would like to have, we can't require people to provide us, so we do the best we can with the information that we were given. But I think just overall, the number of applications we receive, if we see that starting to drop, that would be a concern.
Are you able to look at the applicants and those who are selected and see if there's any kind of biases towards a certain demographic or certain genders to see if there's anything that needs to be addressed in that way?
One of the things, I spoke a little bit briefly about the work with our six-sided partnership, and one of the things that we do with regards to our processes here in the city of Tempe is we make every effort we can to continually look at those and update them so that we can make sure that we're creating the sort of process and the sort of environment where we can make sure that we are being diverse and inclusive in the way that we address recruitment and selection. So as an example, we have a requirement that was just revisited in our guidelines for recruitment and selection that specifies that with the interview panels that we have typically for the first round of interviews for our processes for selection, they must be diverse. And when we say diverse, we give some specific information. There's got to be, different genders on there, potentially different ethnic groups represented. Sometimes when you have just 3 or 4 people on an interview panel, you're obviously going to be limited to a certain degree. But we want to make sure, the typical example that we use, of course, is we don't want to have 3 white males sitting on an interview panel. But we make those sorts of efforts within our processes to try and, as much as possible, address the concern that would come out of us not having a process that would be inclusive.
And also in terms of, as I mentioned, people can self-disclose those things. Those are not available. That's not sent out to the hiring supervisor. It's not available. Oftentimes we don't see it. It's somewhat limited who can access that information. It's more for statistical purposes. And many of the departments work with the analysts in forming a matrix or some other criteria in terms of what are they looking for that ideal candidate. And when they go through those applications, they sort of fill out that matrix, and from that, it helps them select who they feel is the most qualified candidate for the particular vacancy they have at this time.
But, to the point, I think it would be interesting, maybe let's say you tracked for a year total applicants that meet the minimum qualifications for jobs. And you look at their demographic, what the vertical diversity is that's represented of the total qualified applicants. And then over the same year, you look at the vertical diversity of the people who were actually selected as being hired. Let's talk about just external first. And you see the difference between those that were hired and those that were in the full applicant pool, and do a measurement, a side-by-side of the vertical diversity between who's selected versus who applied. Would that be a help? Is that kind of what you were getting at, your sir?
3 of them are women and 2 are men, and they're equally qualified. Are men generally selected?
Right.
Since that was one of the things that was mentioned, so.
Yeah, and I'm suggesting maybe looking at the larger data set, not for any one particular job, but over the course of a calendar year, saying, if we hired 100 people into positions, what does that pool of people we hired and their vertical diversity look like in comparison to the overall vertical diversity of the minimally qualified applicants who we got? And see if we're on target, if we're closer, if our pool is more diverse than our actual selected, and why. Things like that.
No, absolutely, we can do that.
Anybody else? Going once, going twice. Thank you. Well done, gentlemen.
Send us your ideas and suggestions to tempeaccelerates@tempe.gov and visit us at tempe.gov/tempeaccelerates.